That's
So,
fine.
hi everybody, thank you so much for joining us. We've got quite a big crowd tonight, which is excellent. We've got Sally Waters here, and Sally, you're talking to us about early development and trauma, which is excellent. Clearly, there is a need for information on this because we've got such a big crowd, so thank you so much. I have explained it a little bit earlier, but I'll go through it again. Because we've got such a big crowd, we're going to ask if we can put any questions
Oh God,
over
what am I
into
doing?
the Q&A section. So if you hover over your screen, at the very bottom, there is a bit that says Q&A. If you click onto that, you can ask your questions into there. If anybody has asked a question that you are interested in asking, or a question that you want to ask, you can click like it and upvote it, and it'll push the questions to the top for those who, the questions that more people want to know more about. Sally, I'm going to hand it over to you. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining. And yeah, over to you, Sally.
Well, hi everybody. As Katie's already introduced me, I'm Sally, and I'm going to be talking to you tonight about early development. So this is the first webinar I've ever kind of spoken at, so I'm excited. And my son has straightened my hair especially this evening for this honour. So, and I've just realised that I've got a rug beater over my shoulder on the wall, which is not really a good look, is it, for an adoptive, well, for any parents? I don't use it, only on the rugs. Katie, I've already got a question, and Rob, I haven't been able to print my presentation out, so I need to get to the slides where my notes are underneath when I'm screen sharing. Could you, is that a problem? Can I do that? I don't know.
Are you working off one screen?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm not that technologically advanced. Don't worry, I might not be able to do it. Yeah, don't worry. I'll just talk through it. That's fine. So it's really exciting to have so many people, and I am massively feeling the pressure, and I'm quite nervous. So bear with me. Okay. So who am I? I'm Sally. I'm an occupational therapist. By profession, I've been qualified for over 20 years now, and I've worked in a number of different settings, mainly with children, but also in learning disabilities, mental health, adult mental health, but mainly in CAMHS and general paediatrics. I currently work in West Wales. I lead the children's service for an organisation called Our Health Board, which is Welsh NHS. But I also do some private work sometimes if I've got availability. And in the past, I've also worked for an organisation called the Family Place, which some of you may have heard of, particularly with adoptive and foster families. And I was a neonatal OT for 2.5 years, the first one in Wales actually. So I've got direct relevance kind of in terms of, the start of a baby's journey. But also I'm an adoptive parent. I live with and love 2 young people now, and have done for the last 10.5 years. And what a roller coaster that's been. From when they were parachuted in aged 5 and 2 to where we are now, going through the teen years. So very interesting journey. So I think I've got a very lived experience as well. So what I was going to do tonight was talk to you about early years and development and the impact of trauma on that. And because I work in that field, I've got skills that I can, and things I can share with you as an occupational therapist. I don't think I'm an expert, but I am an OT, but you are often the experts as well. But I just wanted to share some of my knowledge with you. And I'm aware it's quite a broad audience, I think. So some of you may be prospective adopters, some of you may be, much further down the journey like I am. I'm not really sure, so I'm hoping I've pitched it right, but we'll see. So some of that will come out in the questions and answers. So it's, bear with me. I'm hoping I haven't used lots of jargon or flowery language, or tried to make it, you know, as straightforward as possible. So the things I kind of thought might be good for us to think about tonight were going through the kind of stages from conception really to pregnancy, to birth, and then the neonatal and the early years period, because I think, you know, what's often missed in my experience is kind of going right back. And I guess for those of you who are embarking on the adoption or fostering journey, this is the kind of information that can be really invaluable, that is sometimes missing for lots of different reasons, not through anybody's fault, but, you know, red books are missing, or parents' health history or pregnancy history might not be known. But these are things that, if you can, you know, from an adoptive point of view and an adopter's point of view, try and get as much information as you can about that. Yeah, okay. So I may have to come in and out. I might stop sharing just so I can get my crib notes, if that's all right. So this is what I'm going to do. Hang on. So I think you can probably just see me now, is that right? I'm still sharing my screen. Oh yeah, I thought it might be helpful to think about what, you know, what is occupational therapy. So is that working, Katie? Is my screen still up? Or
We can see you, but I cannot see the PowerPoint.
oh, that's fine, don't worry. I just thought it might be helpful to just, you know, I've said I'm an OT. Loads of people don't know what OT is, and that's fine. So this is just my little bit of promotion for my profession, and a profession that I'm massively proud of. So what we do, and I know Sarah Lloyd's speaking later on in the week, which is really exciting, because she's kind of been one of my gurus really, and particularly in some of the work that I do. So I'm joining that webinar as well as a professional really, and a parent, to just try and glean some information. So what does, you know, what is OT? Well, we enable people to do the things that they want, need, or are expected to do as part of their daily life. So occupation is like a fancy word for activities of daily living. And we support people to develop, recover, or maintain their meaningful occupations. And a quote that I really like is that occupational therapy adds life to days, not days to life, which is really nice, I think. Okay, I'm gonna, so the kind of starting point for me is that when we're talking about development, is that we're thinking about the brain and the central nervous system, really. I'm just going to touch on this to start before we go, just to get us our kind of heads around what we're thinking about. So if we think about the brain and the central nervous system, they're kind of at the centre of everything that makes us human. And the experiences that we have profoundly influence our development. And often what I do is I think about the brain and the central nervous system in combination with attachment theory, because that helps us understand the role of early relationships as well in a baby's development. And when I talk about relationships, I'm talking about literally from conception as well. And that babies that, you know, have a loving, nurturing experience from conception right the way through, that generally allows their brains and nervous systems to grow and develop really good, strong pathways that mean they move kind of from one stage of development to the next in an ordered, sequential way. So just kind of hold that. But what we do know now is that people who've had adverse childhood experiences, ACEs as they're called, I'm hoping everybody's comfortable with that term, that can shape the way that your brain organises itself. So that's the kind of thinking. And during development, the way the brain develops is it organises itself from the bottom to the top. With the bottom part of your brain, I don't know if you've ever seen, I think is it Bruce Perry often talks about the kind of that. Can you see my fist? Can you see that, Katie? Because I can't see myself anymore. Yes, we can. Yeah, so thinking about, I'm not getting everybody to punch anybody or anything, but this being your brain structure and this being your lower brain, and your midbrain is tucked right in there, and this is your higher cortex. So that's quite a good way of thinking about the brain. So this bit of your brain stem, that's where it all starts, and that's kind of your lower brain. Some people go, downstairs brain you might hear, or your reptilian brain, but that's the bit of the brain that has to kind of hit the ground running at birth, because with that bit of your brain, that's where your breathing comes from. So that has to hit the ground running, and the rest of your brain, etc., can and does grow later on as well. And I don't know if you know, but the majority of your brain organisation takes part in, happens in the first 4 years of your life. And that's the time when the brain makes the majority of its associations. But it's also organised as a reflection of your early experiences. So if you've got early developmental trauma, this can have a disproportionate influence on the way your brain organises and the way it functions later on. So just thinking about that, what the things that can go wrong, literally from conception through to the first 24 months, it can literally fry your brain, and it fries your lower part of your brain and puts it into a permanent fight, flight or freeze situation. And then that throws the rest of your brain kind of firing up completely out of whack. So that's a happy start, isn't it? Okay, so I'm going to go back to sharing again. So give me a moment. There we go. Share that one. Okay, so if we're thinking about conception, sorry, bear with me. I guess the questions to think about, for most people, if they're trying to have a baby, and having been myself, but not being able to bake my own, as I say, generally when people conceive, it's quite a joyful experience. But I think if you think about the kind of children that come into care and for the adoptive process, that the conception of them may not have been particularly joyful. And one thing I meant to say, sorry, apologies, is that some of the stuff that I'm going to be talking about could be quite upsetting. So I'd just like you to be really gentle with yourselves if you get upset, and make sure that you've got, you've maybe got some nurturing stuff, maybe, somebody's hand to hold, or something nice and soft to stroke. This is an OT talking, so I'm all about having regulatory things around you. But yeah, some of this stuff can be really hard to think about as well. So yeah, just going back to conception, it may not necessarily have been that joyful. And how was the baby conceived? Was it through a traumatic event? Can the woman even remember the point of conception? It really depends, and that may mean having to think about where the baby started, really, was rape involved or anything like that. So I think we're talking about maybe a very different trajectory than perhaps another pregnancy, which is a start, is joyful and lovely and all hearts and flowers. It's not always like that for our children. Okay, so that was my starting point. So what we need to think about is the normal kind of environment of, I'm really sorry about this, it's because my printer's broken, the normal environment of the fetus. So the normal fetal environment can shape the brain. A normal sensory environment, the baby's in that lovely warm womb space, it's growing, it's muffled, it's warm, it's got room to move, mum's really happy, mum's living in a calm environment, she's got a nice soft voice, and in a kind of straightforward joyful pregnancy, particularly the woman has already started forming a relationship with this child. So we need to think about that in some other pregnancies, this baby may not be wanted. The mum may not even be able to pay attention to the fact that she's pregnant. It might be concealed, particularly if the mum has had previous children removed. So we need to kind of be aware of what the environment might be like or have been like in the womb for some of the children that come in. I really like this, but some of my staff said this was the most hideous thing they'd ever seen, this baby waving from the womb, but I really like it. So I'd be interested in some feedback about this, because I've done this presentation for
I was writing a response and I looked up and saw this baby me, so I thought, oh.
Sorry, but you've got a happy baby in the womb, happy developing baby in the womb. So that's what I'm saying. In a straightforward pregnancy, the womb environment is very positive. There's good blood flow. There's good things coming across the uterus into that baby, and everything's developing. Like I said, it's got protection from outside stimulation. You know, it's in this lovely muffled, dark, lovely suspended indoor trampoline, basically, and it gets sorry, this is a bit wordy, isn't it? This was for a load of doctors. I think I've nicked this slide off, but again, it's what I was saying. It gets supportive stimulation in a kind of a sequential way as the fetus grows. So that's that kind of thing, that stepping stone again, or that linear progression. And like I said, the systems, in particular sensory systems, come onto line in a specific sequence. Oh, hang on, I'm jumping ahead of myself. I need to stop sharing. So you know, it's important to think about that when we think about where our babies may have come from, or the children that we adopt. Okay. So like I said, the womb is perfect, and also the mum is, you know, developing a relationship, and that baby is designed to receive oxytocin through the placenta and through the umbilical cord, and other reward chemicals that are released by the mum because they're having a baby. It's really lovely. And the wombs are like a perfect place to practice this is where I get animated, because I'm going to take all the motor movements the baby might ever make. So at first, when the baby's small, there's space, and the baby uses the space like a trampoline, and it pushes off the wall, it twists and turns. As the space gets smaller, as the baby grows, the baby starts moving with resistance to the stomach wall and mum's spine and all sorts, and that's what helps build your muscle tone. So it's the beginning of your body awareness, and it's something that I would call proprioception. So that's the knowledge of that you get, feedback that you get from your muscles and joints. Sarah Lloyd will probably talk about this a lot more on Thursday, but it's the knowledge of your muscles and where you are in space as well. So it helps you know where your body starts and stops, so you don't bump into people and sit on people. And when I work with children now, I'll often see children who've got very much reduced proprioception, and they've got no idea where they are in space. They're all over the shop. So that's what proprioception is. And I won't go into that in great detail, but particularly in the last 2 months of pregnancy, the baby starts tasting what mum tastes, and it can hear. The hearings come online then, and it can hear the tone of voice and tone of other voices, and the baby can enjoy what's, you know, the noises around it and music and things. And also it can start to recognise the rhythm of mum's walk. So the baby's already laying down patterns for who this person is, which is really positive then after birth. And mum is also, as the baby's getting bigger, is getting a lot of feedback from that baby about the baby being inside it. And particularly the last kind of 10 weeks are really important. Up till about 32 weeks pregnancy, this is from psychology research, a lot of particularly first-time parents are very excited, and it's all hearts and flowers. But actually what happens is your hormones start shifting. There starts to become this reality of that you're going to hopefully give birth. and the hearts and flowers stuff kind of stops, and this, I'm not going to dress it up, this shit gets real, basically. That's the best way of putting it. So if you think about babies that might be born early, that's where that kind of stuff, it can be really, really challenging if a baby is born early, because what they can't, the mum is just not ready, and it's even traumatic. So the sequence of the senses, it starts with touch, it's followed by your vestibular sense, which is your balance and the way that you right yourself against gravity, and then taste, smell, hearing, and finally vision. So that's the order that they come into. I don't know why, but my mouse has kind of gone a bit funny. I don't know what's going on now. Hang on. Sorry, please bear with me. Sound like I'm in Miranda now, don't I? My mouse has disappeared.
Oh no.
Why would that happen? Oh, hang on. No, it came back then for a minute. Oh, it's there. Oh, I don't know why it's doing that. It's disappearing underneath for some reason, underneath my slides now.
Oh, I see. Sometimes if you hit Alt and Tab, it will take you back to the screen that you were on. Does that help at all?
Yeah, it certainly does. Thank you, Katie, my IT guru. That's great.
Excellent. I've got it sorted. Back over to you, Sally.
Yeah, thank you. So when we think about pregnancies that aren't like the one that I've just described, we're talking about stress, aren't we? And, you know, and this kind of slide says it all, really. It's literally about stress and sorry, here we go. You know, what happens when there's damage, what's going on, and basically the kind of, it's chaos outside the womb equals chaos inside the room, and stress inside the room, well, it is a room of the womb, and stress, and what does that mean for our, you know, for our babies? What kind of things go on? So if you think about stress, what happens when you're stressed is that your brain secretes a master stress hormone, CRH, which triggers the release of stress hormones, which include cortisol, and your brain and your body shift into crisis mode. So I'm probably teaching you how to suck eggs here, but you breathe in and your pulse quicken. Oxygen is made more available for your muscles to go into fight, flight, or freeze. Your blood sugar levels rise, and physiological processes that aren't essential, like digestion, growth, and repair, are temporarily shut down, and you're in emergency mode, and your mind's alert, and you're ready for action, as it were. So we're thinking about that, and when the crisis is over, your stress hormones are supposed to slip back into kind of pre-elevated levels, because that's a normal process. You know, we get stressed, they come down, but what happens if your baseline is permanently high? You know, and the theories and the science supporting this is that if you have elevated cortisol, it's usually bad news. Your body's on permanent red alert, and the body suffers kind of more wear and tear. And if you think about for pregnancy, high cortisol levels pose special kind of risks, and particularly elevated cortisol is associated with an increased risk of early miscarriage. It's also associated with postnatal depression if it stays high after birth, but it does also play a part in getting the body ready to give birth, particularly in the last few weeks, and it also helps in lung development for the baby. So when somebody's potentially going to have a premature baby, they will often be injected with glucocorticoids to develop the lungs, to get the baby ready if it's going to come early. So there's all this kind of balancing act going on in the womb. But if we think about, you know, where the stress might come from with some of our families and the women that are pregnant, you know, we may have existing mental health difficulties. And this is the kind of stuff that I would encourage you to try and find out about. It's really important. I mean, even when we're doing a screening now in general children's therapies, we ask all these developmental questions because that helps us understand, because, you know, maybe why a child's presenting with certain difficulties, because if we can track it back, it may not mean that we can, you know, sort it out, but sometimes it helps parents and carers, you know, have understanding of why the child has these challenges. You know, and knowledge is power, isn't it, sometimes? So we could have existing mental health difficulties, we could have a chaotic home environment, domestic violence, bereavement, lifestyle, you know, chaos, substance abuse, homelessness. Mum's health might not be particularly great. She may use substances, smoke, just maybe generally unhealthy, have a poor diet. It may be a concealed pregnancy. You know, you'd be surprised when you do the digging how many of these pregnancies are concealed, and in that sense they've had no antenatal care either. So, you know, some things that could have kind of been prevented haven't been, particularly when you think about deficiencies as well, you know, which can lead to spina bifida and things like that. So it's thinking about that, you know, maternal, finding out about health of mum. And also, if you think about some of these mums, they may already know that there's a chance that their baby might be removed. And in that sense, you know, have they felt able to develop a relationship with that child, you know, and how stressful is that for them, regardless, you know, of what's going on. And often, you know, if the women and their lifestyle is particularly chaotic and they're particularly stressed, there might not be a steady pattern to the heart rate, and often that the rhythm of mum's heart is very regulating for that baby. So the baby's heart rate can often be very dysregulated. And, you know, so what we do know is that traumatic experiences, you know, if that baby in utero has been, you know, subjected to domestic violence, mum has, and the baby, therefore the baby has, you know, the cortisol that's released does cross the placenta and can be stored within the baby. And also the way that the baby starts to store memories, which is in the limbic system of the brain. So, you know, I went back, can you see that, Katie? Because I can't see myself at the minute.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So this is the limbic system. It's the midbrain. So that bit tucked right inside, and I'll come back to that in a bit, actually. But those memories are kind of stored as part of that system, and they're pre-verbal, and those memories then travel through with that baby into its early days. So some behaviours that we might see later on, they're pre-verbal. So the child will have no words, it will be a feeling or something. But this baby, all we can say is that it's wired already, if it's cortisol damaged, and it's wired. You know, when it comes out, it's already sensitized to stress. And within the limbic system where the memories are stored, it's like your filing cabinet. So if memories are going in a chaotic way, it's already a very untidy cabinet. And the way that memories are laid down are ideally they're laid down sequentially and positively. And that's what enables you later on to have sequencing for things. And as an OT, I'm interested in sequencing for things like dressing, so doing things in the right order, or teeth brushing, so developing skills for independence. And as you grow, like all the things that we want, need, or expect our children to do, and that's what they'll often be quite chaotic in developing those skills, and can often have features of coordination problems and modulation problems, which are kind of sensory processing in nature, because of this highly sensitized to stress and cortisol and this disorganization. Okay, I'm going to talk about birth now. So that's kind of pregnancy, and I'm conscious of time, actually. It's nearly 20 to 9 already. So when we think about birth, I really like this saying Bruce Perry said, it's like the mother of all stress. Birth is really stressful to the grown-ups and the baby, because suddenly, if everything goes to plan, even if the baby's born vaginally, there's a lack of oxygen, they're born into this blinding light, it can be cold, you know, they've come out of this gorgeous, muffled womb-like, well, it is womb-like, it is the womb, protected environment, into this bonkers world of noise. It might be painful. The baby is flooded with stress hormones, and that's normal. And that's when the attachment system kicks in for survival. So the baby will cry or do something to make something happen. And if all goes to plan, the attuned parents or caregivers will meet the baby's needs. So they'll feed it and swaddle it, they'll turn down the light and it'll all be lovely. And the baby, you know, learns to feel safe, and it's flooded with, you know, what I've mentioned before, the reward kind of opiates like oxytocin. And again, it's the same with anybody. If you don't feel those opiate rewards when you're born, a bit like an animal as well, if they don't feel them, they don't get up and they won't survive. So stress hormones and kind of oxytocin are intrinsically linked, and it's that kind of stress of being hungry, thirsty or cold. When that's relieved, we feel pleasure, and that's the start of the attachment relationship as with the baby as it's born. I'm saying it's already started in the womb, hasn't it, with mum attuning to that baby. But obviously we've talked about mums that can't or don't attune to that baby. And if mum is attuned and well, and they've got well organised neurobiology, they can create this attuned environment. But we also need to think about, you know, some of our mums have not, you know, they've had terrible life experiences as well. So they're not necessarily able to be attuned to their baby, and that's where they may need support. And again, it's this kind of attachment and regulation system that sets up the baby for life. But like I said, some of the damage could have already started in utero. So, and it's by consistently repeating that cycle of stress, you know, hungry, thirsty, cold, need a cuddle, and that need being met, that the baby starts to imprint that actually this person's really good. This person can meet my needs. I can start to feel safe and special. And then they can take that blueprint and put it onto other adults as they go through their life. So then it might go on to mum's partner if she's got one, or mum's you know, closest network, whether that's, you know, grandparents or friends or whatever, and then that eventually that's transferred into school. But when you think about some of the children that we adopt or we care for as foster, you know, looked after children, they won't have ever had that blueprint. It's not been repeated enough as well. So they learn not to rely on adults because people aren't attuned to them, and you know, that's very, very challenging. Very challenging. And most children that come into care, we know that they come into care having had a lot of stress. Okay. And also we have to think about the birth as well, that it you know, not all births are straightforward. So, you know, traumatic birth, and this is where a lot of my experience is working in neonates. You know, it could have been a prem birth, it could have been an emergency C-section. The baby could be very unwell, poorly, that may not have been picked up antenatally, and the baby may need neonatal care. And in that instance, of course, what you've got then, you've got separation and baby put in a plastic box. And I can't dress it up any more than that. And particularly if mum's had a C-section, she'll be flat on a bed, and you know, the baby will be over on the unit. There aren't many units nationally that have room to have mum next to baby, so you've immediately got separation. But also with children who are potentially going to be looked after, we've had mums that abscond immediately after giving birth, that just disappear. We've got some that stay, but they're really not interested. What we've tried to do on our unit is, where we know a baby is straight into care, is that we try and set up a foster carer straight away, or a foster to adopt, so that baby can start bonding straight away. Because if you think if a baby's on a neonatal unit, the amount of people touching them and prodding them and poking them is just ridiculous. In a normal, straightforward birth, the baby is here. And it may be touched by, 2 to 3 people tops in its first few weeks. But babies in neonatal care or babies that are removed at birth are touched by a ridiculous amount of people. And we all touch differently as well. And when you're born, particularly with your tactile system, you're born in survive mode. So you're born, like we said, you're born stressed. And by loving, nurturing touch, more deep, rhythmical, predictable touch, you damp down that system, that protective tactile system, which is there to help us detect pain, a pinprick, etc., etc. But we're born like that. And by loving, nurturing touch, we can damp that down so that we only use it when we need it. But if you think about babies that are in neonatal care for lots of different reasons, that system isn't always damped down. So you'll get children way down the line who are hyper responsive and what I call tactile defensive for a lot of different reasons, because they've been prodded and poked in ways that nobody ever should be. And so that's something to think about as well. Sorry, it's but it's how it is. So like I've said, in the early days after birth, we should be held close to mum, and you receive stimulation in a supportive, safe way, and we gradually start to move our muscles more and more against gravity, and the families give them proper movement and emotional experiences that allow your brain to grow. And if you notice if you've ever, had interactions with babies, when you lean over the baby and you coo at them, a baby will do all these lovely, lovely movements, and you get that reciprocity, you get the oxytocin flowing, and that baby's laying down patterns for movement. But babies who've been left or have had inappropriate contact or inconsistent contact, what you find is that when you coo over them, they don't always respond as you would expect them. And that's the start of them potentially having lots of difficulties, and it's already a sign that their brain's not firing up in the way that you would expect it to. So like I said, any parental impairment in the ability to recognise and respond to those cues from your baby and to reciprocate. We've got a real problem now with phones that, often these are great parents, but if you're on your phone and your baby's here, you're not tuned into that baby, and that baby will be cueing constantly, but they're missing it because they're on the phones. So that's a real area of concern as well. And then babies that are just left as well in one position. So, that they're not getting all the experiences that you should, like tummy time as well. If you don't get tummy time, you don't develop your core muscles and your head control as well, to lengthen and strengthen your core. And so if you haven't got core stability as a baby, you can't use your arms properly, and that gives rise to lots of difficulties around being able to feed, hold implements, etc., and develop skills with your hands. So I'm hoping this is making sense.
Absolutely.
I'm going to just...
a few questions coming through as well.
Okay, great. I'm just going to share this because I think this is a really interesting side, and I'm nearly done actually, so I'm going to kind of whiz through. So this is oh, there we go. I'll just whiz through these. We've done that. So this is from sensory integration theory actually, but I think it's really quite helpful, and it's something that I go back to quite regularly, but it shows the kind of the building blocks of development, and this is from theory developed by Jean Ayres, who's a bit of a kind of guru in occupational therapy and the sensory integration kind of field, but she was also an educational psychologist as well. So she's quite an interesting lady. And so this is how she says the building blocks of the pyramid. So ideally, this is what I've been talking about. You start with the bottom, and as the brain develops, these are the developmental things that start to kick in. So you get your sensory systems sorted out, and then if they're developing and you're getting loving, attuned care, and you're getting the right experiences, because so many of our children have got real poverty of experience, then you start to develop your body scheme, your motor planning, which is what goes on in your head before you use your limbs as well, and it enables you to be in the right place at the right time to, say, kick a football or get on and off an escalator, things like that. That's your motor planning. So it's working out where you need to be in relation to what you're trying to do. Now, this is obviously, I'm saying some of this develops as we age as well. So then you get your eye control, and then this is the stuff around the perceptual motor, that kind of matures around the age of 7. So this is why there's always the argument for children, you know, having a play-based curriculum and not being expected to sit down, because actually your postural control isn't fully developed till you're 7. So in Europe, you know, like in Switzerland, children don't start school till about 7, because actually they can only generally sit still. That's one of the neurologically the most challenging things you can do. And then further up the line, you get all this frontal cortex stuff, which is your executive functioning. So your ability to forward plan, think about cause and effects, your emotional brain. But obviously with the type of children we're talking about, all this, some of these building blocks are missing, and it can cause absolute chaos. And some of the things that I've already said. I'm just going to stop sharing again so I can go back to my slides. I am going to mention the limbic system. So like I said, it's in the centre of the brain, and this is the bit that links the lower brain with the higher brain. And the way that it works depends on the early experiences. And we've already kind of talked about it a little bit. And if you think about, if the limbic system links parts of the brain together, but also it's dependent on the early experiences the child had and the way they're stored, this is where, again, you need to go back and find out what experiences the child that you've adopted or you may be adopting has had. And it may mean that you've got to face their trauma, the trauma that your child has experienced, but it will be invaluable in helping you understand them, because what often happens, as I know, is their behaviours that have actually served them really well to survive, when they're placed for adoption, are quite bonkers at best. And you're all excited about having a new family and you think, you know, love will be enough. It is a huge part of it. But also being able to understand why your child cannot sit down, can't use cutlery, needs to run around the dining table and press their face against the window 30 times. You know, if you can understand that, you're not going to get into some of those situations that cause a lot of stress. You're also not going to be re-traumatizing yourself and the child, or starting to traumatize yourself. And, you know, it's all linked with cortisol as well. But also, like I've said, the too much cortisol activates the stress response. So when you think about these children, even minor problems, or it could be a smell, it could be something pre-verbal, it could be a sound that they heard when they were in the room, can trigger a massive reaction, because what will happen is you trigger in that system and they will behave as if they're under serious threat. And also traumatised children can have anticipatory stress, so they're hyper alert. They expect bad things to happen. And then that can affect them being able to control their impulses. So they'll often have clusters of behaviours that fall into anything with a D in, basically, is what I say. ADD, ADHD, ODD, ASD, attachment disorder, lots of things, but I prefer the umbrella developmental trauma. I think that's the umbrella because it covers, you know, every child is different, and sometimes labels can be helpful and sometimes they can't. But that is the end of my spiel. So there we go.
So much. That was incredible.
That wasn't bad timing, actually, because we started 5 minutes late, so
yeah.
5-10 minutes late. So I did about get it spot on. So and I probably spoke. I speak quite quickly, and I have to learn to slow down.
No, it was amazing. I mean, even people are saying, you know, it's wonderful. Don't stop. So yeah,
I need to start. I need my gin now. It's water. Yeah.
You've earned your gin. And you know what you were just saying as well with if you understand that came to your family.
Oh, Katie, I can't hear you.
Oh,
You've gone really, I think you're underwater. You're dipping in and out.
oh, it says my internet connection's unstable. I'm
Oh,
sorry.
you're back now. You're back now. I can hear you.
Oh, good.
So
Sorry.
what were you saying?
Oh, gosh. No, it was just I have 2 adopted children, and my daughter, who is 9, did not have any of the prenatal stressors from, you know, a poor relationship with birth family, whereas my son, who's 7, did. And they are so very different, and I can see exactly how those stressors have affected the way he thinks and feels and reacts to things. It's very black and white. So,
and I think, you know, speaking from personal experience, we had so little information about our 2, just so little. Literally in the red books was that they'd had chicken pox, which actually they hadn't, but that's another story. That you know, even as an OT, you know, I could see from it's very different. I'm their parent, I'm not their OT at the end of the day, but also it's very difficult when you meet, you know, you're so excited, and nothing would have stopped me being their parent ever. It's the best thing I've ever done. But if I'd have had all this information, I had to join the dots up myself and find out. And I found Aideen Brennock, if anybody's heard of her, the sensory attachment stuff. And, you know, and I'm an OT and I've worked in CAMS, and we talked about attachment all the time, but I knew nothing, and I'm learning every day. My children are amazing, and I'm so proud of them. But I wish I'd known all that, because you know, that it might be mum guilt, but I still think that we could have made their journey easier if I'd have had all that understanding. I could have explained and fought for them perhaps a bit harder, but you know,
exactly. And
I know my story is not unique, and I've had some lovely comments coming up. Thank you.
There are amazing comments. Everybody on here, they're just so nice. You know, it's just so nice to be a part of a group of, you know, on a webinar with just people who
get it, because you don't come across them very often, because people say, oh my child does that. You think, no, they don't. No, they don't, because your child doesn't do it 50 times a day. Your child does it once a year. You don't know what you're talking about. But then I've got a ridge on my tongue where I bite my tongue.
Sorry. Let's get into some of these questions then, because quite a few questions. So yeah, everybody, let's get through some of these questions. I'm going to go from, so the upvoting have worked really well. I'm going to go
sense of humour is very important, Sophie, because if I didn't laugh, I don't know where I'd probably be an alcoholic by now. But it's not been easy, but my sense of humour has carried me through. But no, it has not been easy at all, but I wouldn't change it. Sorry, Katie.
So all from the top, if you want to
Katie, you keep cutting out, so shall I jump in and ask the question?
Yes, please, Rob. I can't.
Okay, sorry, Katie. Your internet keeps cutting out. So we'll go from the most upvoted question first. I'll read them out to you, Sally, and then you can reply. So the
Can
first
I see them as well if I click on them? Oh, yeah.
If you click on Q&A, so read the brain development from conception to birth. Is any damage to the development repairable once born if nurtured from birth?
Yes, would be my tentative answer, because if you think about, we call it plasticity. It's plasticity of the brain. So it's exactly the same if you're kind of, I'm not trying to say this being flippant, but if you think about rehabilitating somebody after a stroke, for example, or a head injury, you're taking advantage of the brain's ability to lay down new pathways. So yes, I have a strong belief and hope that that can happen. I think it's very challenging though, and I think for many families, adoptive families, you can't do it on your own, and you need maybe people around you who have experience in this area. But what I would say is that if you think about it in a neurologically sequenced kind of way. And I'd really recommend that you listen to Sarah Lloyd on Thursday, who will talk about filling in some of those blocks that I've just been talking about. She'll go into the sensory and the motor systems quite a lot. She's fantastic, actually, and she's written a couple of really good books, sensory processing and developmental trauma, I think, and she's got a new one out as well. So yes, I think that there is, but I think it's a big ask for you to do that as parents. If you're in England, of course, you've got the Adoption Support Fund. We don't have that in Wales, so sometimes our fight is harder. And I'm aware that not all parents can fight. I mean, I think that wraparound should come with every child, but that's just a personal opinion. And you know, I am a thorn in my local authority's side, and I'm somebody who knows the system. So it's not always easy to get support.
We have to be thorns, don't we?
Yeah, and it's a thorn that I'm proud to carry. I don't care if I'm like Mama Bear, you know.
Yeah.
If you know, I would never forgive myself if I hadn't fought, you know, tried to get everything for my children. It's that whole, you know.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. Okay, next question. If babies are taken from the birth parent as soon as they are born, is the lack of attachment better than having attachment and being taken away after a few weeks or months?
If it's a positive attachment after a few weeks, you know what I was saying about the blueprint of the baby, then the idea is that that blueprint can be transferred onto other people. So it's a bit of yin and yang really there.
Yeah.
I'm not too sure. That it depends on the birth parent's ability to give them attuned, nurturing care. What the baby absolutely needs is a primary carer, because this baby should be here. And also you've got, you know, particularly when you've got babies who are withdrawing as well, they need, you know, my experience in neonates is they're the babies who need wrapping and swaddling. And then you get a really lovely health visitor who's saying, oh, you're making a rod for your own back, you need to put that baby down. But these babies need more, you know, I mean, you know, if you're in Africa, they'd be in a sling, you know, and that's what I advise all our mums going home from neonates, whether they've been prem, poorly, if they've had separation for whatever reason, they need this. And I would recommend that, you know, even if you get a baby at a few weeks old, you go right back and do skin to skin, because it's so positive for a baby and for you to get your oxytocin flowing. Because, you know, if you are adopting and you suddenly presented with a child or something, you don't suddenly attach to them. It's a and also you might attach to the child, but the child might not be attaching to you, if that makes any sense. So it's, go on.
Just throw another spanner in the works. What about that whole concept of kind of skin to skin and attachment and stuff, when, for example, in my case, we adopted a 7-year-old and a 4-year-old?
You can't shove a 7-year-old down your t-shirt, can you?
No, but we found things like they'd never learnt to swim before they came to live with us, so we took them swimming a lot in the early kind of weeks, and it's such a an activity of trust, taking the child into the swimming pool, that they were actually clinging on to us, and it was such a great attachment building experience.
Yeah, and also, but there are things you can do, Rob, as you say. Yeah. So, and also you've got to think that some of these children have had very inappropriate touch or painful touch. So you suddenly like stripping off.
No, exactly.
You know, it's going to be, you've got to think about you trying not to re-traumatize them, aren't you?
Yeah.
So what you can do sometimes is just like you were saying, you can do wrapping. You know, do hot dog rolls in a blanket, but you can lie next to them, so you've got that sense of closeness, and you're starting to develop that. And also things like, you know, you can sleep with things before the child comes and give that to them in their foster home, and then have them on the bed. The whole thing about the skin to skin is the regulatory stuff. We know that with prem babies, the more skin to skin they have, the better they are at regulate. You know, all the brainstem stuff like temperature regulation, pain, the better they are at handling it as well. So if you do have a baby and it's appropriate, I can't recommend it enough for just enabling their systems to reset as well. But obviously with older children, that's a really good idea, Rob. You might need to be a little bit more creative, and you can do things like what I found
Yeah.
as well with my my children who were 5 and 2. It's like I used to do yoga. I mean, I didn't do yoga, but it was a whole ruse, you know, talk about being stealth mum. But and they would like climbing on me, because it's funny, isn't it, when you're trying to do a downward dog and they're leaping on your back. And that was a way of getting kind of sneaky touching.
Yeah.
Well, and some of the activities from TheraPlay kind of informed stuff. There's some sneaky touch you can do there.
Yeah.
As well, like lifting out of the bath when you've got a towel in between you as well, and drying. And if you're behind always tell the child you're going to touch them if they're older. You don't want to freak them out. But there's lots. Sorry, I can talk for ages, Rob. I'll stop.
No, it's great. I think it's just really interesting. Like you say, like I said, we did teach them to swim. We used to have things like always having blankets nearby on the sofas when we're like watching TV and stuff, so we can snuggle under a blanket together and kind of get
sneaky
cozy.
touch. The other thing that really helped me was the dog.
Yeah.
Because they would quite happily lie all out. The dog gave them a lot of skin to skin. Yeah. I mean, that dog's passed now, but we've got another dog who is just amazing and loves to lie on you. He's really regulating because he's really heavy as well. So the boys adore him because he lies on their bed and he lies on them, and he's like a hot water bottle as well. So
brilliant.
Yeah.
Okay. Next question. So we've answered that one. Question for Sally. For children that have experienced much trauma in utero, please can you identify how best to work with children whose pain, heat and cold sensitivities are not instinctive or are not there at all? From an OT perspective, how would you suggest parents and schools work with children that experience this on a daily basis?
You're talking about interoceptive stuff there. I mean, that's a whole presentation on sensory processing actually, which is a separate thing that I would do. That's real resetting brainstem stuff and regulatory stuff as well. I think, I don't know whether they're asking because the school don't get it either, and what you often get is the children that they can end up having accidents because they'll get into boiling hot baths because they can't feel temperature, when they're pseudo mature, and I can do it and jump in as well. I think the thing is often it can make you very vigilant as well, but I think some of it is around as an OT I would approach that very much from a regulatory point of view and actually resetting the sensors. So it's you need a professional to support you with that personally. I would never do that as a parent, because you would be looking at resetting their whole touch system, because that's where a lot of those come from. And it's what I was saying, that they're constantly in survival. So their discriminative touch system and their interoception means that they're not responding interoceptively to their discriminative touch is the one that helps you discriminate pain and temperature and like what's in your hands as well, so you can feel in your pocket and find a 50p, for example. But if you've got loads of touch sensation, you've got more of those in your fingertips and around your lips, but if these children haven't had the right touch and stuff, or they're on alert, that they're so stressed, like you said, that system hasn't been able to develop because it's the survival touch system hasn't been damped down by loving, nurturing touch. So you would have to go right back and reset, and you would start with proprioceptive input, because that's the regulating sense of all the senses. But you need, Beacon House have actually, thank you, Diane.
Yeah, that's a good
shout. Really good. And some of the stuff around the sensory attachment intervention as well. But I would suggest you need OTs. I'm an OT, but in general paediatric services, a lot of them won't have the trauma piece. So there'll be brilliant clinicians, and a lot of my staff will hold their hands up. There'll be brilliant clinicians, but they don't have the trauma piece. So they'll come in with the best. You need an OT who's got the trauma piece.
Yeah.
And there's not many of us about, but we're growing.
Yeah.
So that's good.
I think what might be useful to do as well as a follow-up to this, we'll be posting the video to the webinar on our website. We'll also include some links to some useful resources based on the questions that have been asked as well.
Yeah, and I can find some, Rob, as well. Yeah, that'd be
great.
really, because I wish I'd had more of that.
Yeah, and what we'll do as well, just so everyone's aware, we might not get through all the questions tonight because I'm aware there's about 25 on this list and we're not going to make it through all of them. But
No.
any questions that we don't answer, I'll keep a copy of them and we'll see if we can include some responses to some of those questions on the webpage, which will be emailed out to everyone as a follow-up to the session tonight. So hopefully, you know, you'll still be able to benefit from some of that support material.
And also just to sorry Rob, I spoke over you then, but from an OT perspective as well, what I feel is when you're working with children who've experienced, you know, significant trauma, and you're also working with the adoptive or the foster family who are also quite traumatized by the time they get to you. So I'm drawing on some of the work we did at the family place, that as an OT I would only do this work within a multidisciplinary team, because actually you need that support, you know. So somewhere like the family place, Family Futures, Beacon House, there's quite a lot of organisations now, but I think because you get the full piece then. So as an OT, I'm very aware of where my limit, you know, I'm not a psychologist, so I understand attachment, and I've done DDP level 1 and Theraplay level 1, but I am an OT, so I can inform the rest. So what, you know, the model at the family place is often that you would come in at the bottom with the OT and the regular, you know, the brainstem stuff, building up to Theraplay, and then you finish up with the talking, the more talking therapies, the DDP and the life story work. And that is, I would say, reflective of most of the big guns kind of models. So Family Futures, Adoption Plus, I call them the big guns, you know, Beacon House, those are they might say it slightly differently, but most of them work in that kind of sequential way. Because if a child doesn't know where they are in space, they are nowhere near grounded enough to do talking therapy, and they haven't got a frontal, you know, this is where your talking stuff comes in here. There's no way they can access that part of the brain. So you know, it needs to be done. And somebody said about the NHS.
So there's a question there about FASD, which I'm going to skip over for now.
Oh, well done, Julie. You put your babies down your t-shirt. Yes. Validation. That's great. There's an FASD
There's
one,
an
Rob,
FASD question. So I was going to just skip over that one for now because I think it's a really important subject, but we've got a whole group of webinars about FASD specifically, which again, I can link to and can send you more information about. But like I said, FASD is a whole other
it's massive as well, isn't it? But if I can just say, Rob, my experiences is the cluster of behaviours, particularly around the sequencing and the organisation related to kind of task acquisition. So when I'm talking about, you know, learning to brush teeth and the clusters of the work, you know, which is why as an OT, I'm not that big on diagnosis. It's helpful, but actually what I want to know is what is the impact on that child's ability to do their occupations. You know, whether they've got a diagnosis of ASD or what. I want to know, so it's that so what question. So, but the FASD and, you know, the clusters of behaviours that they present with are often very similar. So, but as an OT, you know, we would look at what's important to them, what's important to their parents or the carers, and what is it they want to be able to do or are hoping to do, and where are the risks as well around that, because it might be around hygiene because they're soiling, you know, and they're getting picked on at school. Actually the child might not care. You know? So it's hard to work with somebody who doesn't care, you know, and a lot of our children are heavily invested in not caring, aren't they?
Well,
for lots of different reasons.
This is it.
Yes, it would impact on their language development.
Are you reading that?
Just down below, it's the next question.
Oh, yes, sorry.
Sorry.
Impact on child's language development, yes.
Hello?
You what?
Said she's doing your job for you.
I know, she's doing a great job.
Sorry.
You didn't be here. She's running the show.
I'm off now, you see. I've got over my nerves.
That's it.
The gin's kicking in as well.
It's been fantastic, Sally. It really has.
Yeah.
I'm just conscious there's a number of people that are kind of popping off and leaving now. So if you do leave, please, you know, thank you very much for joining us this evening. It's been absolutely fantastic. It's been our biggest webinar today. Over 170 people joined us at the peak of this evening's session. So it's really fantastic, Sally.
I'm
She did a
glad I had
great
my
job.
hair straightened, especially.
Oh, did you say your son straightened it as well? He did a great
Yeah,
job.
he did. Isn't he fantastic? He's great. And
Really good.
yeah, he does makeup and all sorts. He's amazing.
This is fantastic.
Yeah, it is.
So are you okay for time to answer a couple more questions?
Yeah, I'm absolutely
And
fine.
we'll carry on going
I'm
through them.
enjoying.
But if anyone does have to go, then, you know, thank you for joining us, and we will send out details about when the video is available and that kind of thing, and we'll carry on answering a few more questions. So we skipped over one there about the NHS. Can parents access OT resources to support their children? Adopted children are often accessed and advised to have lots of resources to support core needs. How do we access
Yeah.
resources?
So top tip is what you need to say is the impact. Don't just describe their history. You want to say how it's impacting on your child's ability to do their daily occupations. So how is that impacting on them? Is it that, you know, they can't or won't get dressed? Is it that they'll only eat certain foods? Is it that they can't use cutlery or ride a bike? You know, because what we often find with our children is they have very, what professions call spiky profiles. So they'll be amazing at one thing, but they can't do another. And this is what I'm saying. It's like, whereas, you know, people see development as linear, it isn't with our children. And they may have, so for example, I worked with a little boy who had amazing fine motor skills, but he couldn't do other stuff. And we worked it out. It's because he'd spent hours in his car rocking like that. So he had really good shoulder stability. And the more stability you've got here and here, the better able you are to use your hands. But he got really good shoulder stability because he'd spent hours rocking on all fours. But it didn't mean that he could speak. But he could hold a pen and he could draw a house at the age of 4. You know, so it's like, it's kind of joining the dots up for me and making sense of things. And I think that's what often gets missed in general services. They'll get dismissed because you don't meet thresholds for this, that and the other. So if you want to get OT, you need to say what the impact is. And it's different, I appreciate, in England and Scotland and Wales in terms of how you might access services. And it's different in areas as well, depending on resources. Obviously, lockdown's just been a joy. So, yeah.
Hasn't it?
Yeah.
I think that's a really good point as well. And is there an age thing on when the best time is to try and access these resources? And that
Earlier
kind of
the better.
well? Earlier the better.
Earlier the better because of plasticity, really. It's harder. We've also got these windows, so you've got kind of up to 2, but a lot of services don't have early intervention, although a lot, which is why it's so fantastic having a neonatal team in my area now, because we're seeing, you know, we are getting it right from the start, hopefully, or getting it righter. It's probably the best way of saying it. Yeah, righter. So that's not correct, is it? And goodness knows how I would say that in Welsh, because we have a high percentage of Welsh speakers in our area. So yeah, the earlier the better. You get another window around the age of 7, and then another window kind of early teens as well, which are better times. But then it's a bit like anything. It's a bit like doing a master's module. When's a good time, isn't it? Never, probably.
I was going to say that for me, you know, our eldest was 7 when he came to us, and obviously had different things that he struggled with. But one of the things you just mentioned, which I think is a really important point for adopters to kind of hold on and remember, there are some things that they will be brilliant at and will have really great successes at, and there'll be some things that they find more challenging. And you know, to focus on the things that are successes and, you know, celebrating those things is equally important to their wider development, isn't it?
And don't get hung up on, you know, milestones and chronology. If they are overall developing, then that's really positive. But don't get hung up. But having said that, you know, some schools get very hung up on they can't do this and they can't do that. But like you said, Rob, it's really important to look at thank you, Katya. She's another OT. You know, it's very important that we look at the strengths, and I think that's what you'll find occupational therapists are very good at. You know, and what we don't do is talk about what the child's struggling with in front of the child, because of, you know, the shame that can invoke as well. That's a really important thing to consider, isn't it? And yeah.
Good. Okay. So we've kind of touched on this, but if adopted at 1 to 3 years old, will there be any chance of repair or reduction to the trauma and attachment process that adopted children have suffered, or is there an inevitable long-term impact?
Oh, that's a real toughie, isn't it?
Mm.
I think I'd like to say my personal experience is that it's something that I've come to accept without any apathy, but also see it as part of what my boys have brought and will bring, and that also that will be part of who they are, rightly or wrongly, and also that some of the legacy that you live with, you may never be able to change, but I will happily die trying.
Yeah.
If that makes any sense, you know. Oh, it's made me really emotional.
That's a really good answer.
Because you know, we don't 100% know, because we can't see inside people's brains, can we? And the way that you know that things are working is by what you see them doing, isn't it?
Yeah.
So to see a child, you know, I think about one of mine who couldn't literally sit still, to sit at a table, you know those plastic, are they called hammer beads that you can then iron and make patterns? Yeah, I should know really, shouldn't I? But to be able to see them sitting doing that with some tweezers, you know, maybe a year or two later, was something that I never thought I would see. So that was a real, and for them to be able to, like you were saying, Rob, to sit and be cuddled and have their hair stroked in a very relaxed way, not in a rigid, compulsive, compliant, I know I should like this, but it's really hard for me, but I know I should, you know. Those are the wins for me, and that shows me that there's something going on internally. But I think you may not see it, because sometimes the challenges are huge, aren't they? And the vileness is vile, but you have to hang on to the fact that each time you're dripping in, and you may not see the results of it for a while, but hang on in there and use all the support you can get.
And it's a bit of a crystal ball type, trying to predict what a child is going to be like, isn't it? You
can't predict what any child's going to be like,
no, exactly.
can you?
Just because they're 1-year-old, 3-year-old, 7-year-old, 12-year-old, when you adopt them, you don't know how their experiences will impact their output and the way that they respond to things to you. So it's not an easy prediction, is it?
No, but as long as I know that I've done right, and I feel that I've done right by my children, that's enough for me. So oh, thank you, Victoria. Oh, so there's an EHCP.
So we're applying for EHCP for our son, now in appeal stage. It is very difficult to get across the relevant people, teachers, Department of Education, how early trauma has impacted on our son's ability to perform at school. He's now 10, was neglected and abandoned as a baby at 3 months.
Oh, I'm just so sorry you're having, because it's traumatic for you having to fight all the time, isn't it? It's exhausting, and I can only imagine what your home life's like as well. So it's that I can really relate to that. EHCPs, I am familiar with them, but obviously in Wales we're still on statements. But one of the things I found was just to get any you know, your allies on board. I'm not sure what the virtual school's like in Essex, or whether you can get any support from that team. Sometimes that's really helpful, and anybody that you can get through the ASF, any funding that can get reports that will inform that process, because you know, as you know, tribunals take note of, rightly or wrongly, you know, what do we know as parents? Sometimes it's only when other professionals say stuff. I always remember going into schools when I worked at the family place, and we used to go over the border. So and it's amazing how they would listen to me without even realising I was an adoptive parent as well, because you know, you don't share that with everybody. But that I was only saying the same things that this amazing mum had said so many times, but they listened to me. So frustrating. So yeah, I would find out who your allies are. Also, you know, Adoption UK have some really great support, and you might want to put that question out on the chat board. I'm really sorry, Rob, my membership's lapsed, but I was a member for years, but I used
come on here.
I know, who do I think I am? But I used the chat room a lot in the early days to get advice like that.
The forum's still live, and you don't have to be an AUK member to use the forum, although we'd love for you to be a member, obviously. And also, I was going to say the helpline is open to any adopter.
That's my confession to you, Rob.
No, you're fine. we actually have been running a series of education helpline surgeries, and
Okay.
that would be something that you could potentially access as well. If you
Yeah.
call the AUK helpline, we shared the number earlier and it's on our website as well.
Yeah.
We could probably book you in for an appointment to have a one-to-one discussion with our education
Yeah.
advisor,
Brilliant.
who works as a kind of intermediary in Hertfordshire, but is also offering support on an England basis.
So
And I
right
think,
next to Essex as well,
well, I was going to
Hertfordshire,
say
isn't it?
you're in Essex, so that's under the Adopt East Regional Adoption Agency remit as well. So there might be some other support we can get you tapped into, including like the
Brilliant.
virtual schools and that kind of
Yeah.
thing. So yeah, ring the helpline would be my number one piece of advice there, and see what we can do.
Good luck. It's a really
Yeah.
hard process.
Sorry, Joanne's asked about a previous question that I think we might have skipped over about language. I'm just trying to see what that was. I
Oh,
apologise if we skipped over it.
yeah, I did say, didn't I, that if you go back, I did
Right.
nod to it. It was about it affecting language development as well. And yes, any trauma affects language development and language acquisition. If you go back to that pyramid that I showed, language is up there, and it comes later on. And what you'll often find is there's real gaps. So some of our children may have talked early doors, but then they stop through trauma. But also, if you think about the way the brain fires up, and a speech and language therapist would be able to, which is why I love a multidisciplinary approach. And there may be, you know, there's lots of adopters who are speech and language therapists as well, who are a mine of information, but they are brilliant at explaining. I work very closely with SALTs or SLTs, and
Yeah.
but they're brilliant at explaining about speech and language and development and how trauma impacts on that. And there are some teams that have speech and language therapists as part of them to inform that. There are some really good speech and language therapists who work in CAMS who were brilliant. Oh, it does.
So usually, where would you go to get a referral for speech and language? Would it be through the doctors, or would it be through schools?
It depends. Yes, because a lot of speech therapists have contracts with education through your NHS. But a lot of, I mean, in Wales locally, a lot of our, I mean, in my health board area, which covers the 3 counties of Carmarthenshire, Ceredigion and Pembrokeshire, we have open access for therapies, so parents can refer. So I would try and find out, rather than making you jump through all the hoops of going to your GP or your school nurse or whatever. But you may also, if you live in Flying Start areas, they generally have speech and language therapists as part of those teams, for all the reasons that Flying Start was. No, you're not Flying Start in England. They're not there anymore, are they? Sorry, I'm talking because that's a Welsh thing now. It was called something Start in England, but it's Flying Start. We still got it in Wales, but a lot of the earlier stuff is very well set up. So it may be that you need to do some trawling on Tinterweb, or go on the forums as well, because there are adopters that are speech and language therapists.
Yeah, Sure Start, as Carol said. Is that
That's it.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
I think, because I know we had speech and language therapy for our eldest.
My youngest did, but I had to prompt the social worker when they were still in foster care. They said, "Oh, he's not talking very much." He was 2 and he got like 3 words. I said, "Well, has anybody referred him to speak?" "Oh no." I'm like, "Refer him. This is ridiculous." So you may need.
I think our referral was through school, but obviously if they're not in school yet, it might be through a GP or something like that.
And again, the earlier, the better. But there's so much stuff out there now.
We were 8. Our eldest was 8 before we got the speech and language therapy. So they said it was really lucky that he'd managed to actually. It was really successful, but they said it was lucky because of his age to have been that way. So.
And I know, as well as a parent as well, you know, if you then have to do therapy on top of, you know, having constant arguments about teeth brushing and going to bed, it's, you know, it's a big ask sometimes, isn't it, to be doing all that on top. And I know you want to, but I think it's about, sometimes it's about, you know, you deciding what your priorities are as a family. And I always try and be very sensitive to that as an OT, that I don't ask people to do specific therapy. I try and weave it through their everyday life so that it just becomes kind of innate, because it's much easier then. I know how challenging, you know, adoptive family life can be for lots of different reasons. You know, it's not the norm, you know, it isn't the normal, whatever a lot of other people's norm is. Our norm is a different norm. So,
Yeah.
oh, there, Julie's giving a good answer on speech therapy. Just there, it's just popped up on the chat. So,
okay, so because of the time,
oh yeah,
we're just going to take the next 2 questions. There would be the top 2 upvoted questions, and I think we'll have to leave it there because we're approaching 9:30.
yeah.
But any questions that we haven't been able to answer, like I said, what I'll do is I'll keep a record of them, and we'll try and do a transcript of the questions and put some typed up answers on the webpage when we post the video of this webinar, and hopefully that will be okay for everybody. And obviously, you can always email into the membership@adoptionuk.org.uk email address as a follow-up, and we'll post that in the chat now. But like I say, you'll all get an email as a follow-up from this session, and you can respond to that, which will be from the community team, and we'll support you in any way that we can after this session's finished. We've got another 9 events coming up the rest of this week, so it's a busy week of things for you to join. And yeah, we're always here. The helpline's always open Monday to Friday between 10 and 2:30, and the forums are open 24/7 online. So there's lots of opportunities to still get answers to the questions. So the last 2 questions that we'll do, Sally, we have 2 teenagers, 18 and 15 years old, who we adopted at 3 months and 11 months. They're not siblings. We are having support.
Hang on a minute, you want to go that? Sorry, I've got a son coming down the stairs going, can I come out now? They like my hair, by the way.
The hair was a big success.
Yeah, I've got my earphones in, so no. Yeah. Just stay that side because my camera's on, okay?
Sorry.
I can read it, Rob, yeah.
You got it.
3 months and 11 months, we're having support and early trauma. I suppose we don't know if there's a bit. Oh, that's such a tricky one, isn't it? It's like balloons with threads, and which thread do you pull down on? I always go for all of it. Because it's a bit like, and the question below about the premature babies and when you're looking at, I would put all of that into the formulation, as I would call it, about the reasons why, and I think all of those are valid for lots of different reasons. And yes, I mean, Sally Donovan talks really well about the teenage years as well, doesn't she? I mean, she's another, and because she's called Sally, it's just a beautiful name,
Sally
isn't it? Yeah, of course it is, just so we call Sally. But yeah, she talks very well about the teenage years. So you think, when you're an adoptive parent, that once you get to teen, everything will be sorted out. No, that brings a whole new set of stuff, doesn't it? But yeah, I would. Do you want to know where the behaviour is coming from, or are you able to think, well, it's probably due to this? It depends how important it is for you, because it could be any of those things for lots of different reasons. But what you might be able to hypothesise is if you go back to the early years and get, I mean, what I had to do was go back, and we had to persuade the placing authority to do us a timeline and life story stuff and all that, so that we could get that information.
Yeah.
So you may want to do that, so you've got a developmental kind of history or a trauma chronology, which is what a lot of it's often really helpful. And then you can, sometimes I find if you map things in a timeline, you can work out when critical things were, and that will help your formulation or your reasoning. And because I think what's really hard is to know what is just them being annoyed and what is due to the trial, and I don't always know, and then I think, well, do I need to know, or are we just going to deal with it? Because I think what I try and do is, if I deal with things through a trauma informed lens, that's you can use that lens to deal with things whatever the reason is. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I think it's a really good answer there, because it sounds really obvious, but one of the things that's been really critical for us has been having a really good pool of friends who have got children similar ages to our kids, so that aren't necessarily adopted, but you can kind of just go, oh, they're doing this. Is that like just a normal thing that their kids do? Like at the moment, it's a 10-year-old thing, and it's like, oh my God, the 10-year-old's doing this, and everyone down on the playground is like, yeah, all 10-year-olds do that. That's not anything to do with the adoption.
Yeah, because you don't know, because this is,
you don't know,
if you haven't had birth children, this is your normal. this is, exactly. And I have that. But one of the things that it has helped me is working with children as well. But although most of the children that I see have difficulties, but like you as well, we've got quite a close knit.
Well, I was going to say, the other side of that is being part of like an Adoption UK community group, where you then go and talk the other side with other parents that are dealing with similar issues with their adopted children. And you're kind of getting both sides, and that can be really helpful just in that way.
Doing like attachment focused parenting or trauma informed, that is a kind of a good way to parent anyway. So, that would be my go-to.
Definitely.
And look through that lens as well.
One of my favorite friends that we hang out with as much as possible, they have 2 birth children who are just a bit mad. And it makes me feel so much better.
Birth children can have difficulties anyway, for all the reasons that I've just said. If you've had a terrible birth, or they've been prem, or it's not just or they may have a disability, congenital, disability. It's not exclusive to adopted children or children in care, is it? So I think sometimes you forget that, don't you, because you're in this bubble of madness. Like you said, Katie, you see that actually there is madness all around.
There is.
Yeah.
Okay. So last one. Do more premature babies struggle with, I can't even pronounce that properly.
Proprioception. It's the thing that I said about the muscles.
Yes, with not having a chance to experience body awareness.
So, anonymous attendee, this depends on how they were looked after in the neonatal unit, whether they were, the model on the unit was around developmental care, which is what the OTs are all over. There aren't many neonatal OTs in the country. There's about 20 of us, I think, all told, nationally. But it depends what unit you were on and whether they followed and how the baby was positioned. And what we do is we nest the babies. We try and recreate the womb, and it's a neuroprotective approach that is led by the parents. So we teach the parents to do as much care for the baby, and that includes tube feeding and all sorts, because the idea is to reduce the trauma that baby has through. And when I say trauma, I mean like being touched by rough staff. And I mean, some of the doctors are just appalled. The state they leave my babies in, I go mad with it. I've chased a junior doctor off the ward and brought him back in to show the state he's left my baby in, who's just collapsed in and become really disorganized. So it depends. It really depends. But yes, they are more likely to struggle with things like proprioception, so where they are in space, than others, but it does depend on their experience in the neonatal unit and how they were looked after.
Okay, great, thank you. I think we're going to have to leave it there. I'm really sorry, we've had so many great questions and we haven't been able to get through all of them.
It's all right.
Like I said, we'll do our best to, well, I wasn't as much apologising to you, Sally, as apologising to all the participants that have joined us.
yeah as well. No, I'm saying absolutely. It's been can I say thank you? Just it's an absolute privilege to do this. I I feel very I think it's really important that I'm passionate about giving things back as well, and it's been an absolute privilege to kind of share some of my knowledge with you. And like I said, I'm no expert, and you guys, our world is a world of specialists, isn't it, and experts, and you're all doing an amazing job. So thank you.
Ali, the comments that have come through though today have just been amazing. So people have loved this.
And the power of Twitter. This is how this happened. I don't know if there's a lady out there called Jo.
Oh yeah.
She'll know who she is, but it was on Twitter, and I said, I think one of your staff was putting a call out, and I said, I'm a neonate, I would do it, and she kind of seconded me, and Jo and I go back a long way. I won't go into details, but she's been an inspiration to me. So yeah, it's all Jo's fault. That's all I'm saying.
Well, you know what? We'll have to keep her around a bit longer, I think. Sorry, Rob keeps messaging me. His computer just crashed, so I literally jumped in right at the right time. So you can probably hear it. Yeah, that's Rob.
Oh,
What I'm going
bless.
to do, though, is I'm going to stop the recording now, so that